Brethren and sisters, we welcome you to the podcast and hope you will find joy in listening to the infants this day. Those of you who are here to listen for your own edification, good on you. For those here listening on behalf of deceased persons, what the hell are you thinking? They're dead. They can't hear a damn thing. Or can they? Brethren and sisters, if you are true and faithful to the things you hear in today's episode, the day will come when you probably will rule over everyone, because that's just how we roll. The realization of these blessings is dependent on your ability to stomach the contents of this episode and listen to it all the way to the end and believe everything you hear and be indoctrinated by the infants, placing their scatterbrained thoughts and opinions above all else. Or else. For the infants shall not be mocked. Except when they do it to themselves or when it happens without consequence in any other way. If any of you desire to withdraw rather than press onward with this episode and accept these things of your own free will and choice, then just stop the episode. I mean, it's pretty easy. Just press stop.
So I'm going to ask you this, Josh, because you've mentioned the Book of Mormon. You've made some subtle Mormon references. What qualifies you in your mind to critique ideologies, and why do you want to?
I want to say, whom the Lord calls, the Lord qualifies.
Yeah. And by that, do you mean me?
I don't think I'm qualified. I don't really care. I just think if you can do something well, then do it. And I want to. I guess I'm annoyed with the woke hive mind that's infected liberalism and turned it into what it is. I guess I'm mad. I guess there's anger behind it. I don't like it when people set things up to win by cheating, and it feels like once an ideology prevents itself from being critiqued, crappy ideas are winning because they've insulated themselves from the light of day. And so it makes me interested in shining the light of day on them and making them actually get out there and compete. I don't like things being removed from the marketplace of ideas where they have to live and die in battle. I want to put them back in the Colosseum and see if they can actually survive. And I get so annoyed by grifters and charlatans that their ideas suck, but they've made it illegal to question them.
Now is the great day of my power. I reign from the rivers to the ends of the earth. There is none who dares to molest or make afraid.
I can't put up with being a coward anymore.
This is the Spiritual Heretic Podcast.
Baby steps.
Further light and knowledge.
I liked magical toys.
From the philosophies of men, mangled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
After your faith has let you down, look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 865, The Birth of the Spiritual Heretic, Part 1. And today you'll be hearing a conversation that Josh and I had about starting a new podcast. When we recorded this a few months ago, we hadn't yet settled on a name. Josh definitely wanted Heretic in the name, but I wanted something that felt a little, healthier to my sensibilities. Ultimately, we settled on The Spiritual Heretic for the name of this new project, and today you're going to hear the first of two discussions that are essentially birthing this new project into existence, I guess. So, what does it mean to be a heretic, and why do we think that it's important to to be heretical? Well, that's what you'll be hearing us discuss today. And now, with no further ado.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
While we just talk. The thing that I like about heresy is it seems like what happens in a body, in a sense of like the T cells that go around killing the aberrant cells, but when the body prevents that, you start to get like a cancer that grows. So if the system can't have its heresy or its T cells that are killing aberrant cells, then you actually get a lot sicker. And the other way I think about it is like I think they're osteoblasts and osteoclasts or something. They basically are the way that a bone, the weaker tissue is removed, and then the other cells come back and patch it back up and make it more dense and strong.
Yeah.
And so the body is always doing this upkeep of essentially what I would call literally constructive criticism. It's how it's physically maintaining itself. And in the world of metaphysics, we have these things that exist, and there's some of us that exist within this metaphysical entity, this egregore, as you call them. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well
these
done.
egregores. And so, so within the egregore, there's some of us that want this job. It's our instinct. It's our nature to find certain things that are being protected, certain cancers, and attack them. And when the system starts to fight those cells from doing that job, the way in which they do that is heresy. So for me, heresy itself is already a healthy thing within an organism that's requiring something to be challenged, or if it can be destroyed, to be destroyed. But we also don't have to call it the Heresy podcast. There might be a fun way we could talk about what we're doing, but essentially that's the task. That's the podcast. Is the idea is we're going through the metaphysical structures, the ideologies, and we're finding what's being guarded from critique, and we're asking, can we talk about it? Can we go into the taboo zone?
Yeah.
So
I love everything you
call
just said. I love everything you just said, Josh. Health and heresy is kind of where my head was at. And you were saying that for you, heresy already implies health.
Well, it implies that if we can share that with people in some way,
Yeah.
or if they can take that from it. I don't think people hear that word and think anything of health at all.
Oh yeah, if people hear the word heresy, they're not thinking health. You're thinking that's something
They're thinking
that the heresy is the cancer that has to be eradicated.
well, yeah, if they're part of the egregore's defense mechanism, then yeah. Maybe we should call it slaying the egregore.
So it's like, yeah, because that'll be really clear. People know exactly what that means.
It's getting more and more esoteric.
Yeah.
Let's chew on it. Maybe we can even record a few and we can get to the name, and it'll be part of the fun discussion of what we decide. But I think there has to be some fun, interesting way to talk about the concept of what we're doing, and at a certain point we can call it whatever we want, and I'm not going to be invested in not naming it, because it starts to become like a band. The band's
Yeah.
the band
You gotta have the
the
right
name.
name.
The name takes on meaning as the band's music gives it meaning.
Uh-huh.
So health and heresy is probably fine. It's but let me just chew on it. I think there's got to be a way to tackle the fact that what we're doing is we're attempting to help here.
Who are we attempting to help? See, because when you're talking about these T cells that are going through the body and they're
Yeah.
looking for, what it is to destroy,
Yeah.
are you focusing on your body, your mind, your worldview, your understanding, and saying, I want to get myself in better order, I'm putting my house in order? Or are you looking outside and saying, I've got the answers and everybody else is wrong, and let's put that bigger house in order so that they're lined up with my correct way of seeing it?
Right. Yeah. let's change the world without working on ourselves. That's
Yeah, or right, or thinking that
I'm
we can change the world, or even that we can change ourselves, like what or that they're separate things.
without any focus on me, I'm going to deconstruct everything else. It sounds like a group of people I know. Um,
So let's
uh,
let's imagine that this conversation that we're having right now is the first one that people who don't know anything about infants on thrones is hearing. They've
yeah.
they've like they're looking at different podcasts and they see one called Health and Heresy and they're like, I'm going to click on this and see what that one's about. What do you want to
Well,
say?
okay, okay. What I want to say is, so this isn't like something new, what we're talking about doing. And in fact, there's a living legend in the philosophy world named Slavoj Žižek, and he is essentially going about this project that I want to share with, which is to critique ideology.
Hmm.
So he believes that his role as a philosopher, or his specific brand, I think it's Hegelian dialectics. It's impossible to understand for any normal person, including myself. So I don't consider myself some expert on his nuanced philosophy, but the main concept, which is understandable to any person, is he believes that anybody's individual capacity of freedom is bottlenecked at an ideological lens that they're looking through.
So that's
And
that's that very personal, like looking at yourself. You're looking at where your own internal bottlenecks are from your ideology that you carry.
I think that's true, but I think he would also say, as a member of culture, you're aware of the some of those cultural things, and you can critique them when you see them. And so, for me, it's not necessarily taking the stance of I know better than anyone. It's we're heretics, we're questioners. We're not giving down a new dogma. We're just saying, like one example is I'm very curious. I would love it if we could find somebody, Glenn, the most die-hard supporter. I would love to host a dialogue between two people because I've wanted to get to the bottom of this because I don't know what's going on. And I'm curious, and maybe this is pure ignorance, but it seems like a taboo topic to discuss chemtrails.
Mm.
These things that all these people say it's just hydrogen or water vapor from the speed of the airplane. And then there's other people that are like, no, it's geoengineering and there's none of this before a certain time and blah, blah, blah. I would want to just have the conversation to try to metabolize it and go in there and look at what people are presenting. This happens to be a topic I know nothing about.
Yeah, me too. I've heard people talk about chemtrails, but I don't really know what
I
it's
have no
about.
idea, but it's curious to me. And so
Yeah.
it's almost like because I'm curious and because it gets so much flack from people that are anti or people that are for it. They just see each other. So it seems rife with ideology. It
Yeah.
seems like there's anything that it's wrong to ask questions about for the most part. I want us to be able to go in there and dialogue it.
Mm.
And the dialogue is really more of a critique and a questioning and an examining and observing how this thing is structurally functioning. So, for example, if someone's like only idiots would ask about chemtrails, I would say, well, that's a function of making my questioning invalid, and it functions to uh, absolve you from responsibility of answering my questions. Like,
Okay.
is it possible, and how would we know, and can we ask the questions? So that's kind of what I would see it as. It's not I know the reality and I'm going to come tell everybody, or and to a large degree I think it's very productive and helpful for a person to examine um their own ideological stances and to do that inner work, and
Yeah.
it can be very liberating for anybody. For myself to do it, I'm always interested in doing it. Like, what are these? They're the parameters in a sense of my ability to explore reality, and if I can critique them, I like push out a bigger and bigger box that I live in.
Yeah. So you have been a therapist for about ten years now, right?
Yeah, I think
And
actually maybe 11.
11. Okay. When you're sitting across from a client and you're asking questions
and you encounter resistance of any kind,
Hmm.
what does that resistance indicate to you?
Well, it could indicate a lot of things.
Yeah.
It might most primarily indicate that I'm having an agenda and that the person is, we're out of connection now, and I'm doing something that they're now, that maybe I've crossed the boundary of what I think would be like a helpful therapeutic dialogue. And the way that I think about this is the goal of the therapeutic encounter is connection and contact between two people. When you have a goal for the other person, including a goal that they feel better, you are going across the boundary to try to have an impact on them, to do something to them. There are subtle ways a person can do this, but what it functionally is it's the function of aggression. And the function of aggression will often cause a reactionary response of what a person calls resistance, which is a person will push back on it. So if I noticed resistance from a client, it would probably indicate to me that something I'm doing is causing them, I'm going outside of the zone of their willing and happy participation on something. And I've done something that has caused them to react to defend or protect themselves. So if I wanted to go into a topic without being aggressive, and I still think it's something important to bring up, there's ways to do that. And so, but they're respectful, and they bring me to the contact boundary, meaning I'm disclosing information about myself without coming forward at the person.
Contact boundary. Explain
Yeah.
what you mean by that.
It means basically both people's meaning making, phenomenological reality touching and making
Yeah.
contact at this boundary between the two people, is boundary between them and the environment. It's a theoretical concept.
Right. And so you're talking about, and this could be like ideological boundaries where things, what I'm trying to do is draw a parallel to
Yeah.
these taboo subjects that, like you can talk about this, but you can't talk about that.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
brings up like really strong resistance
yeah,
in
it
people.
does. It does, because typically we're going to get into another vein, but let me just finish this question real
Yeah.
quick, because there's a way you can bring yourself to the interaction. I said contact boundary, but for listeners in a simple way without getting into Gestalt mumbo jumbo, it means in the conversation, I'm going to show up with a certain stance and a certain intention, and I'm going to present myself in a certain way to that person that allows them to understand and be in connection with me, that is not going beyond to do anything to them. And it might look like I have an interest, or I have some idea about something that I think might be really helpful for you, and it seems really obvious to me, and I have a strong sense of wanting you to operate differently than you are. And that's what's coming up. That's what I'm noticing. Now, it might be in your clinical benefit to just bracket that, meaning you set that aside and you make a clinical decision to serve the person in some other capacity. Like, for example, you might say, this person has had such a difficult situation. I'm making the assessment that they won't be able to hear that kind of feedback and utilize it usefully. So I'm not going to even share those internal dialogues with myself. I'm going to give myself some space, and I'm going to say something that is still showing up and still honest, or I'm just going to listen more, and I'm going to say, oh, I understand how this is for you. I'm not going to choose to challenge, but those decisions are clinical decisions, and they're made with judgment, and they always are a risk. They're always a risk that the clinician makes, and at certain times you get better and better at timing when those are, and you're looking for cues that the client is becoming ready and has enough internal support within themselves to be able to take on that uh, that level of energy from you in your presence and how you're connecting with them.
Do, do
Yeah.
you, this idea that you have of heresy, seems like heresy is kind of pushing against resistance. So you're saying that in a therapeutic situation with a client, you're not pushing on their resistance at all. You like recognize that it's there, but you see it as being something that would get in the way of the connection, and so you kind of pivot from it, or
It's
you make a decision.
It's a little more subtle than that. And
Yeah.
and I'm appreciating these questions. I think they're helping it get illustrated more, but you will not meet resistance unless you've done something to call it forward, even if it's absurd. For example, like I say, "Hi, have a seat," and they're like, "Oh, interesting that you say that."
Mm.
Like it could be something very gentle, and so it doesn't mean you did something wrong as the
Yeah.
therapist, but it means something has transpired between the two of you that has elicited this in the person, and you become very curious about what your role in that may be and what's functioning in them that may have caused that. But the resistance is not something you it doesn't come up without something happening between the two of you.
Yeah.
And ideally, depending on the situation, whether, a very, some client may bring resistance to anything you do, and they might not be suitable for therapy at that time.
Mm.
And other people may be getting pushed around by a therapist and they're not giving any resistance at
Yeah.
all. And they're just getting completely bowled over. So it can go all sorts of different directions depending on the person you're with. But the idea is resistance is information, and it can in some cases mean you are doing something, and it can in some cases mean the client's having a reaction to something that they perceived in you that you may or may not be doing.
Yeah.
Like they may imagine something that's not even happening at all, and they
And
may
and
then
I'm
use it to it.
and I'm using the word resistance, but I'm thinking about like if they get defensive, if they
Right.
get
Yeah.
angry,
Yeah.
or if they just shut down, like all these different ways that there could be resistance
Right. Yeah.
to what you're saying.
And but when we shift it, if we want to shift it to the question you'd asked a little bit further back, is like, when we're going into a dialogue around a topic that someone doesn't feel interested in going into, that is not therapy anymore. So we don't have some contractual obligation to be in service of client self-awareness and developing ongoing, like, um, responsible, integrated, growth-oriented life.
There's no
So what
podcasting code of ethics that we're trying
yeah,
to
we're not trying, we don't have that goal. We don't have to work
right.
under the burdens of therapy. I mean, we're paid a lot of money as therapists to do something very challenging and difficult with an individual who's also there attempting to get something from it. When
Mm.
we're podcasting, we don't have to operate that way. We're trying to just, but there's something I think is really useful about what you said, and it's there are certain ideas that are not up for debate. That's at the core of this, is these ideas that we insulate from critique. And it's usually because they have a structural function that supports people's needs. And so people don't want those things critiqued. So one example is somebody who's a church employee and they're doing very well. They're going to be more likely to defend anyone critiquing or asking questions about the validity of the church because it's functioning on so many levels, meeting so many needs of theirs. So they're not going to want to explore that. And so these social contagions or these ideologies, they can become extremely protected by people whose needs are being met by them. So, for example, um, with somebody who takes on an identity that's highly prized within a group, they're going to be less willing to look at how they got there, and they're going to attack anybody because the idea isn't an idea that's just decorative. It's structurally functioning to meet needs. And those kind of ideas will meet tons of resistance and even attack, um, to protect them, because it's like, the way that I would say it is, it's almost as if you're walking into their house and you're knocking down support beams and they're like, no, versus you're trying to like ask about a wall that doesn't bear anything, but you're hitting load bearing, uh, structural pillars in their way of getting their needs met. And so ideas are not something that people just play with simply. They're life and death for people. And that's what, it should be understood, is that it's not a simple, we're just playing around with ideas. When we talk about these things and people's reactions come up, usually that will indicate that there's a strong need being met, that's behind someone's intense emotionality or protective or defensiveness to a certain idea. And that can show up in therapy, but therapy and podcasting are two different
Yeah.
worlds.
I think I asked the question again to try and draw a parallel between that resistance that you get as a therapist and any like skills that would translate from your experience as a therapist to what we're going to be doing as a podcast or doing this podcast when we meet resistance in any of these topics that we'll tackle.
Well, I think we can expect that, the egregore has an immune system, and the egregore has its own T cells, and it wants its ideas to live. And then to take that out of the metaphor and put it into more practical real world is when you go at social truths or structural ideas or uh, structural ideas, that's not, maybe the way of saying it is ideas that function to meet a person's needs, you're going to be met with a high amount of energy. People are not going to let you ask them, if they need to maintain a connection to their mom, they're not going to let you question whether, she's a bad person in some way or something. One thing is like people who are confronted with like their grandfather being a Nazi. They're going to resist because it's going to harm them if you're right. And so that's how some ideas get protected because uh, for many reasons, but one of them being that the it's a social truth that is used for that person to participate and maintain connection to community, which is a need. That's one of the ways. But then there's other functional needs, or needs that are being met through the maintaining of certain of the ideology. And if you're aware of that, you can kind of like get a little room and critique it and push back. But when you're unaware that it's actually about your need being met, it's not about whether the Book of Mormon is true or not. It's about, whether or not I can remain in connection with my community. Then you are able to make more, you're able to do more, you're able to have more decisions that you can make. And so when you see that like, there's all sorts of social groups that require certain belief sets in order to maintain access to them, then you see why people get very defensive and proactive on their maintaining the belief.
All right. So I'm going to ask you this, Josh, because
Mhm.
you've mentioned the Book of Mormon. You've made some like subtle Mormon references. What qualifies you in your mind to critique ideologies, and why do you want to?
I want to say, whom the Lord calls, the Lord qualifies.
Yeah. So the Lord, and by that, do you mean me?
Um, I don't think I'm qualified. I don't really care. I just think if you can do something well, then do it. And I want to. There's something I have energy about, which is, from the Mormon sphere. Uh, I critiqued it, and then I guess I'm annoyed with the woke hive mind that's infected liberalism and turned it into what it is. It's just this, it's really demented. Um, and so I guess I'm mad. I guess there's anger behind it. There's anger at these uh I don't like I don't like it when people set things up to win by cheating. And it feels like once an ideology prevents itself from being critiqued, crappy ideas are winning because they've insulated themselves from the light of day. And so it makes me interested in shining the light of day on them and making them actually get out there and compete. I don't like things being removed from the marketplace of ideas where they have to live and die in battle. I want to put them back in the Colosseum and see if they can actually survive. And I get so annoyed by grifters and people, charlatans, that don't, their ideas suck, but they've made it illegal to question them. And I think also there's a lot of harm that's happening in this world right now, as a result of certain ideas that are taking root. And then, funny enough, maybe we can get into this or even watch some stuff, but there's been this insane kind of opening of like what's been happening in the world of video games
Hmm.
with like the uglification of female characters in the games, that they're making them extremely masculinized and hideous and grotesque and just ugly as fuck. And it's all generated by this weird group called um, Sweet Baby Inc. and then Ghost Baby, and then there's another like Ghost something. But we found out that they're like publicly funded. So it's like what the hell is going on that people are infiltrating and perpetuating certain ideologies and then making it illegal to question them. And they're affecting our art, they're affecting our music, they're affecting our movies, our cinema, our politics, our world. And so for me, it seems like someone's got to get out there and start asking these fucking questions and finding out what the hell we're living in so that we can deal with it. Nothing is so sacred it can't be placed in the world of ideas to see if it can survive. And I saw that in Mormonism, and it annoyed me, and it leads to abuse. And I see it here, and I just see it. It's a duty in the world that you have as a part of a collective species, if you're able and you want to try to ask some fucking questions.
So basically, you just want the female depiction in video games to meet your approval because it's gone downhill, and you see that this is like a huge travesty.
If we can't get the TNA back in video games, I will have failed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so success and failure, you've talked about the success of ideas, and you want to get these ideologies in a coliseum and have them battle it out. Are there rules, or is it like no holds bar? Because if it's no holds bar, then I think we probably already are in a coliseum, and you're saying that this side has cheated, but the side actually understands human psychology a little bit better,
Yeah, they
and
do.
they're just kind of kicking your ideas ass. You're calling your ideas superior, and they're saying, nah.
Well, they're playing it's funny, they're winning right now, and they are in the fact, in if we call it, like, let's take the Coliseum out and say there are no rules, it's the jungle. That's another way I've talked about it. Um, then it's just, to me, it's a very pathetic little creature that can slither away, and it is winning, but it's not winning because it's better. It's winning because it's very clever.
But it's
And
better at something
it
because
is.
it's more pervasive, and
Right.
it's got people putting up resistance to
That's
what you're
right.
saying is the better idea, but they
But the
can't
better
see it.
idea doesn't win. The better idea doesn't win.
Why?
It's because the better idea isn't how you win the game. How you win the game is you win. And if you can win, you win. And it found a way to win with a crappier idea. And so what you have to do is figure out what it's doing and get at it. And how you get at it is you have big enough balls to be called names while you attack it, because people are going to call you names. That's what it does. It starts calling people names who question it. Just like in the church, they call you heretical. If you question it, they call you a sinner. They call you an anti-Mormon. If you question, chemtrails, maybe they call you an idiot. If you,
Or question vaccines, and
yeah,
you're called
if
an
you question,
anti-vaxxer.
yeah, you're called an anti-vaxxer, and you're like, I don't know, looks like a lot of people are dying of myocarditis, but whatever. Um, and so people, the way that it works is it works because humans are afraid of being called names, and they're afraid of too many people attacking them if they've got the guts to question something. And so I guess what I'm saying is, at this point, I have the guts and I know how to beat this thing, and I'm willing to be called the names. So now we can get it. And once we get it, then our idea, you have to grab it, and you have to be willing to let it attack you with its venom. And its venom is it's going to have a mob of people on the internet, artificially perhaps, uh, call you names and call you sexist and stupid and homophobic and transphobic and all the phobics and all the isms. And
All the phobics. It's interesting because
yeah,
like you talked about fear. Like
yeah.
fear is this tactic that's being used,
And
I
it's a
think,
good one. Yeah,
to you get a population in fear, like very easy to
yeah,
control and manipulate
yeah,
when you're in fear,
exactly.
or other people are in fear because they're not thinking it all the way through. They can't. They
Yeah,
got that
yeah,
amygdala going.
exactly. So I think to your point, the thing does win, but I think I see how it's winning. And I think once you simply choose not to care, then you can actually have the conversation. And once you do, the conversation is going to show you that, this thing. The other thing is a lot of these people in the ideologies that I don't like or things that bother me is they don't debate people. They say the people are bad for wanting to debate them.
Because they're reinforcing the fear message.
They're saying only bad people question me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can talk about what the usefulness of those kind of people are, but they're good at whipping up a mob, and they weaponize people's need for social connection, and they meet people's needs. So I guess another way you win is you meet people's needs better than they do. And then you get your own group of people. And, the people I'm interested in having conversations with are and having listenership with is people that want to have more fun, interesting, honest conversations about the world, and they're not insulating real, it's like WWE versus MMA, like you can manufacture everything and make it look like anything you want, but what's going to happen if an MMA, you know, heavyweight goes up against WWE? I mean, it's going to be heinous. I mean, I think we actually had this happen. There was a guy who left the WWE and went to MMA and just got wrecked, couldn't do it and quit. Um, that was years back. But that's the way I feel. It's like if you actually, stop the if you're willing to not let these defense mechanisms bother you, then you do have the winning hand. You just have to have the guts to stick it through and not be worried about the name calling or the cancel mobs or whatever, whoever else wants to come after you. You have to be willing to be Martin Luther and go nail your thesis to the church doors.
Yeah.
You have to be called a heretic. You have
Yeah.
to be called a sinner for questioning the sacred social truths that only bad people question.
All right. So do you want to do you want to with this podcast talk to people that call in? Or do you want to schedule interviews? Do you want to do a
That would be
mixed bag?
hilarious. Do you think how would we get our first callers? That'd be so fun. I just wonder like who are we going to get to call? And maybe I guess we could just say tell us your experience of coming up against a social dynamic that was crazy, and we'll have a conversation about your experience. That would be amazing.
Or
Because,
just like
well,
pick a taboo subject and let's go.
the taboo subject that I think, seriously, it's extremely taboo. And I was been thinking about as we were talking, Glenn, I'm like, should I even bring this up? Um, but I'm getting more and more in touch with it, and it reminds me very much so of the pain and the intensity and the difficulty of people leaving Mormonism and how their lives were just upended and destroyed. And it's a very sensitive topic, and it's one that they call you a lot of names. There's a ton of energy around, and it's children, especially young girls, transitioning into another gender. And I have heard from the community of people, of parents that they have no idea how to engage this with their children. It's meeting a huge social need for their kids. Their kids are told that they're awesome, they're brave, they're amazing, they're strong, they're love bombed into oblivion. They're given so much social credit and attention, which is what you're starved for at that age. Women are the most social of our species, and we're a hypersocial species for the males. So there's this insane amount of overwhelming attention that they get and positive reinforcement. And then they go down these roads of body modification, changing their hormones, their gender, they're cutting off their breasts, they're doing all these things. And the parents are just watching this powerlessly, and there's a lot of hurt and pain and suffering. Um, that's happening in that world because we're not allowed to question it. Now we have the WPATH files coming out. I think that's what they're called, or something path, but they're basically like showing how this is like medical malpractice. There's tons of countries across Europe. Britain was the most recent that outlawed hormone blockers for minors. We're seeing that this was largely experimental. There's certain kinds of cancers that go up like certain 1,000%, I think, if you take these hormone blockers. So there's all these like adverse medical events. And then on the other hand, you have people saying, if you talk about this, you're committing genocide to children who are the most vulnerable, and they'll tell you that you're doing these horrible things. You're not allowed to question it, or you're a monster. Um, and so this is where my heart gets in the game a little bit more than, we've been talking in the head a bit here. But I feel very concerned for families. I feel very concerned for young children growing up in this. I feel very concerned for what the lack of courage to have a conversation about this can do. So the idea that, families or people who are experiencing this could call in and talk to us about what they're going through, what they're experiencing, I think we'd have just a ton of parents that are very distressed. They're very concerned. They're often very liberal. They care about their kids. They love
Yeah.
their kids, and they don't know what to do because their child is having all of this experience of basically that intense social need is being overwhelmingly given to them, and they're kids who the most vulnerable are going to want that the most. I think about, for me, the relatable, and it's extremely different, but it's where I felt the most social pressure was the glory that I was given for being a Mormon missionary.
Mm.
And that's not something that I really probably wanted to do, but I knew that was the way I could get love, I could get attention, I could get status, I could be cared about. I wanted those things. So kids want and need those things, and they're not aware that they're trying to get those needs met because they're still children operating in a body that's rapidly changing and adjusting, and it's very difficult. So um, I think that's a protected conversation that nobody really wants to have, that needs to happen more. And I think there's a lot of people going through a lot right there, with their children, especially these daughters and especially daughters that potentially are on the autism spectrum.
Mm.
So there's a lot of evidence to show that they're extremely vulnerable to that. They already have a very difficult and um, kind of challenging relationship to their body in certain ways that fit some of the symptoms that are described for gender dysphoria. So they're maybe more predisposed to have that experience exacerbated within them. But there's books about this, and there's things, we could go into more, but I mean, it's a pretty taboo topic. It's not as light and fun as chemtrails. There's a lot more skin in the game. There's a lot more people that want to really come after you for trying to look at this in a humane and caring way.
What yeah, I mean, I've got so many questions about this just because I really don't know very much about it at all. I've had a few interactions with transgender people. You've probably heard the one that I talked about on Infants on Thrones, that really important person to me. And
Yeah.
he was born female, and he said to me, Glenn, like, have you ever put on a Halloween mask and you're looking through the eyes, and you know that nobody can see who you really are, but you can see them? He's like, that's what I felt my entire life.
Yep.
And when he made the decision to change his body, and like, I'm even worried about if I use the right words or not as I'm talking about this.
Yeah,
That's how, like,
it's
this.
scary.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very rife place, and there's high stakes for how we speak about it, and it's kind of the heart of these things is we're there's a way to honor a human's experience, and especially
Well, let me finish what I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
because I was going to
Yeah.
ask you a question. So,
Yeah.
when he told me about what happened, this was like back in the late 80s when he did his transition
Right.
surgery. So it long before what you're talking about right here.
Right. They're
And it
almost two
was the
different things.
University of Utah that he went to, and they had a team, I think he said like 6 or 7 psychologists. They tracked him for 2 years, and at the end of 2 years made the determination whether he was eligible to have the surgery or not. But it sounded like it was a very carefully vetted process that he went through. But from what you were just telling me with the problems of like medical malpractice and these hormone blockers and things like that, it sounds like maybe
the process now isn't quite as stringent as what my friend told me about the 2-year
Yeah.
process. We're going to determine whether this is right and healthy for you or not. And then they made that determination.
Well, the number one thing here, I think, to really focus on that's the most significant to me is it's an adult versus
A
a
child.
child.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think when we make that distinction, we're having two separate conversations. And then there's a larger conversation, which is what does it mean for anybody to be who they are? Who are you? What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Yeah.
That's at the core of this.
And
What the
the
hell
other
does that
question that
mean?
I have with this is, where are these kids getting the information? Because
TikTok. It's mainly a social contagion and it's spread through social media.
it's TikTok videos.
Yeah, yeah.
that
A
they're
lot of it's we see like you can there's people who've written books on this, Glenn, and I wish I could remember their names, but um they look at the social contagion spreading primarily through social media platforms, and one of the most influential is TikTok.
okay.
Yeah, that's where it kind of you see when that happens, and you see the numbers of
But
transgender
it
girls
isn't.
just explode.
You,
It's
you
like
asked such an interesting question about
yeah,
like
yeah,
that. I just want to be me. What does it mean to be you?
yeah.
You know,
What
that
the
kind of
hell does
thing.
that mean? Who
Because
are
doesn't
you?
TikTok have the algorithms that, like, whatever your interests are, you're going to
No,
get more of that thing?
no, no,
No?
absolutely not. No.
Oh, okay.
TikTok is a highly weaponized social experiment being done on us by the Chinese government. And
Hmm.
the reason we know this is because they don't show any of the kind of videos that are being shown to us to their own people. It's like high achieving activities, math, science, health. That's what they give their own group because they know what you consume shapes how you perceive reality.
So they're giving Americans junk food?
Poison. They're giving us as much
Yeah.
poison as they can, and it's effective. It works. So they shape the algorithm around being highly addictive, but they know how to make it addictive in a way that can be addicting you to science, math, and achievement, or it can be addicting you to believing that you are not in the right body, and that the only way for you to be a good person is to either not be in the right body and change it, or to support other people doing that. And they heavily weight that in their algorithms and how they do things, in addition to other things.
Hmm.
But it is, yeah, it's not, you can easily see based on what they do with their algorithm here versus there that it can do many different things. But, we're still on this thing that I think is really important at the base of this is what's the difference between ego and a rigid character and who you really are?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you this about personality too, because a
Yeah.
couple of weeks
What
ago I
is a
asked you about
personality?
personality, and
Yeah.
you're like, "Yeah, I don't know if I really believe in personality," or you said something
Right.
like that. I'm like, "Wait, what do you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Well, what is personality?
What is personality?"
Yeah. What does it mean? What are we talking about? Because it's a difficult question to ask.
I'll tell you what I think it means. I think
Yeah.
it means somebody's habits and preferences and learned behaviors, um, biases. There's all kinds of things that go into it. That's based, I think, partly there's some genetics probably, and then there's a lot of acculturation. So I think it's
Yeah.
that nature nurture thing. But
Yeah.
like, I'm going to react and respond to things differently than you're going to react and respond to things differently because I'm a different person. I've had different experiences in my life. I'm unique. You're
Right.
unique. And
Right.
so your personality is the accumulation, the way that I see it at least, the
Yeah.
accumulation of all of the experiences that you've had in your life, and kind of the way that your brain processes information based on what you've previously experienced and what the outcome of that was.
Yeah.
I heard somebody describe I interviewed somebody once about the Enneagram.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's like back to Jung, and then into it goes from Jung to the um I think maybe he was directly responsible, or
for
someone
the
later
Enneagram,
with.
I don't
No,
know.
it links back because it starts with the Myers-Briggs,
Hmm.
which is like the personality test of introvert, extrovert,
Right.
sensing, judging, and then you get people that are essentially operating from that world of looking at things in that way and describing people based on these personality traits that they develop to describe certain personality types, which is all in that field of like, Jungian world. It
Mm.
originated there. And
Yeah.
so Enneagram is just a later iteration. It's like, personality theory archetypes and these personality traits is it's the world of Jung. Then you get Myers-Briggs, which we could say that's like the Model T car, and then the modern iteration of the Enneagram is like, that's your current.
I want to ask you a question about a metaphor. So when I interviewed this woman, she gave me a metaphor of a dog in a backyard, and that the backyard is full of grass, and the dog in one corner of the yard is the food bowl, and the other corner of the yard is this, and the dog over weeks and months wears a track in the grass based on where it goes on what it's doing. And she said that's kind of like our brains. It's kind of like our personalities, our learned behavior. You could think of personality in the way of like the tracks that the dog's going. And I liked that because at the time I was learning more about neuroscience, our neural pathways, the way that, that the more you do something, the more robust your neural pathways get. It seemed like the dog that's walking through the yard that's creating these paths. So that made a lot of sense to me. But are I'm so it seems to me like that the resistance that you have to personality, if I'm reading this right, is that people then pigeonhole other people in and say, "Oh, you've exhibited this kind of behavior, so you're this kind of person," and then it's kind of closed off. Am I reading
It's
that right?
pretty much the biggest difficulty I have with it is when it becomes a way for a person to turn themselves into an object versus
Mm.
a way that a person encounters themselves on an ongoing basis, which is in flow and has capacity and memory and history and ability and tendency, which they bring forward, they experience as part of their collective way of making meaning of themselves. And it tends to continue over time, at least in a certain way, although it's always changing. And it basically makes it into some kind of object, and then they are an object that is this thing. And I don't believe in that. I think there may be a way a person definitely, and I would never doubt a person telling me their own experience of their life, other than, to just be like, okay. Um, Unless there was some reason why I would need to not take some, like they were lying all the time or something, but or I thought they had some ulterior motive. But let's just say it's a straightforward, honest conversation, and we know that going in, then yes, people will have experiences and they will meaningfully organize them based on how they're perceiving and experiencing themselves, and they'll seek solutions for situations that they're in. And a person can get to a place where they feel something within themselves, and the solution that they seek is wrapped around some kind of thing that says there's a meaning telling them they are a certain way. And then when they do it, it has significant meaning to them. And if they're an adult doing that, I don't give a fuck. I don't really care. What I have a different problem with is when it looks like there's a social contagion among children that's promoting the same problem and the same solution. And it's a different thing that we need to be able to talk about and ask questions about. The amount of people that were perceiving or experiencing or making the meaning that their body is incorrect and that they need to actually go through with the surgery to become the correct body for them to feel comfortable is a very tiny, tiny fraction of human beings, prior to certain times and certain events. And so it's interesting that those things shift. And I think we can look at that and ask those questions and see if we can see what's going on. But even in those events, it's not clear to me, like, like I identify myself as some kind of a musician. Um, and I guess I don't know. I want to maybe take some more time to thoughtfully get clear on how to talk about this in when it's pertaining to adults experiencing these things, because it's interesting to me. But it's like if I said I'm trans brown-eyed and I knew that I was brown-eyed my whole life, and I because I have blue eyes and I need these brown eyes, it's the same way I would question that. Like, what are you actually experiencing? Like, if I was talking to me, I'd be like, well, what are you actually experiencing, and how do you know that's who you are, and what does that even mean that you are that? Like, what does that mean? Like, how are we getting here? And it's like, well, every time I see my blue eyes, I just feel disgusted. And I know that's not the real me. And I'm looking through a mask, and I need them to be brown. And so I'm going to get doctors to go in there and remove, um, the tissue that's over the cornea and get them out and make them brown so that I can be me, the real me. I just see it basically like that. It's worth being able to ask, what are we doing? And if it's an adult who wants to make that adjustment, fine. But I can take you seriously and I can take the meanings you make seriously without believing them literally or that there's some essential reality to them versus a subjective experience you're having and a way you want to respond to that subjective experience as an adult agent, then that's fine. I'm not going to get in your way. But I'm not going to necessarily believe that you are another gender or another sexual organ type in a body that isn't that sexual organ type.
Yeah.
Like,
So
I'm
so
not going to believe that.
so you're questioning then the identity. Like, why is it that someone would form an identity that's contrary to their gender of birth?
Or just what does it mean? Like, what does it actually mean? Because I personally don't believe that, like, I don't believe that a person who says my real self is brown-eyed, what is the real self? What is this thing that they're fixating on? They're connect, and if we keep it in that, it's a little easier to see because I think there's a lot of emotionality and sympathy around the other one because you care about these people and they're in a lot of distress. And so they deserve respect and dignity and care. And I want to be clear on that, that I think people in the trans community, especially, of course, I care a lot about all of them, including the adults and children, but that there's a conversation that asks, what are we talking about here? What does this actually mean? Like, what does it mean if I was telling you I have brown eyes? I've always known that my whole life. I've always known that these were brown eyes and that the blue is not me. Well, I'm attaching meaning of who I am on some part of me, and I'm making that significant. And I'm saying there's an inherent non-physical me, like a spirit me, that needs this physical me to match that in order for me to feel like I'm me. I think that's what they're saying. I mean, I would want to actually ask someone these questions if there was somebody willing to have that conversation with me and they had the self-support to have it without, trying to attack me. I'd want to be like, what are you describing that this thing is? Because it looks like what we're really talking about is you're a person who wanted to change an aspect of yourself so that you would feel good. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I don't think there's some spirit inside you that is different than your body, that your body has to change in order to be you because it implies some kind of concrete objective you. And I don't believe in a concrete objective you. I only believe in kind of what you were talking about, some kind of historical, cultural, genetic, meaning making
The
organism.
malleable conglomeration of all of your
Yeah,
experiences of existence.
there's no rigid self. Like if I said, my whole life I was behind a mask, but I finally went to the gym and got my six pack, and then I was the real me. I
Mm.
was the real me, Glenn. When I saw that six pack, I finally was the real Josh that had always been in there. I don't buy it. I don't buy that that's the real me. It might be a part of me that I always wanted to manifest. It might be a part of me that I always wanted to experience. It might be what allows me to love and connect and feel like I'm really comfortable within my body. But I don't believe there was a six-pack Josh that was in there that was
Yeah.
trapped.
Yeah, as you're talking about it this way, the thing that I guess I have empathy for
Yeah, and I
somebody
do too.
that thinks that like the real me isn't the me right now.
Exactly,
Like
and I do
whatever it
too.
is, like
Yes, whatever it is.
whatever it is that's the real me, I'm so
Yeah,
far away from it and see this
yeah,
gap between who I
yeah.
am and what the real be. It's filled with depression and
Yes.
sorrow and sadness
And
and
suicidality and
yeah,
all sorts and ostracization totally. And
and
when a person,
self-loathing
yeah, and
because
self-loathing because
yeah.
they're looking at what I'm not and I need to be different and I need to change this thing. It's like if somebody said I always knew I was this tattoo and I finally got the tattoo and I'm the real me. I'd be like, "Well, I'm glad you got the tattoo, but I don't believe the story. I just think there was something going on."
So if the
I don't think,
language then
yeah,
was not, this is the real me,
right,
like the real me is the brown-eyed real me.
right,
If the language was, you know, I've never really liked blue eyes. I just don't
right.
like the way that it does. I've
Yep,
always wanted brown
yep,
eyes. I
yep.
think I'd feel more comfortable with brown eyes
And I got the surgery and I finally was delighted in myself. I finally felt great. Part of me would still feel sad because I'd still feel like, damn, that must suck to have really been at odds with yourself that way and to have fixated on some aspect of yourself that you needed to change. I don't like that. That's me. That's my reaction. But I would also be able to understand that experience more because you're describing it subjectively versus some kind of essentialist, like there's a ghost in the shell and the shell needs to fix itself until it resembles the ghost. That doesn't jive with me.
Well, and because when you phrased it in like the real me, it's almost like one of those rhetorical devices that says you cannot question this because now you're questioning the real me.
Heresy.
And that's going to be a heresy.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, it's a heresy to attack a person's help. Like they can't help that that's the real them. And how dare you interrupt them from becoming that? You know, you're a bigot and a hate monger.
And then how do you get through to somebody who has framed themselves in that way? And
exactly.
They're not gonna change their mind just because you say that they should.
No. And so in this kind of conversation, we can give ourselves a lot of room to do whatever the hell we want. In a therapeutic setting, it's not your prerogative to make that change other than to hold an honest dialogue with them and explore with them to the degree that they're willing, able, and interested in doing so. And so you may not, there's different ways, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can provide excellent therapy from a loving, empathic place that is designed to not get someone to conform or to rebel against society. That's my stance. And at the same time as people are doing that, you can basically say, I think the youth of today might be encountering a social contagion, which is very dangerous to them. And there may be a very dangerous medical model that's rushing them into life-changing physiological interventions that are not ethical. And you can take that on outside of the therapy room, and that's going to potentially help them even more. Because within the therapy space, it's not appropriate to have an agenda to do something like that, or you need to own it and then not act on it. So you need to say, I really see what you're doing is potentially very damaging and scary. I'm very scared by how you're approaching this. And I'm concerned. And I'm also not going to act on that other than to share that with you. And in the hopes, if I'm being fully honest, that you'll take that into consideration and maybe reflect and slow down. However, even that has to be made in clinical judgment. And this gets into like,
whether you tell them that that's what you're feeling or not.
Whether you tell them that's what you're feeling or not. And then the other thing is, you're not their parent. It's not your job. And at a certain point, I think that the stewards of children are their parents. And I respect parental autonomy to, prevent children from doing certain things that they believe are not in the child's best interest because it's still a child. So I think parents have that right. I'm a firm believer in parental rights, and I don't think society has more rights than a parent outside of, simple abuse kind of scenarios. And so, so there's multiple things we're talking about, parental intervention. What's the role of the therapist? What's the role of somebody who's looking at society and trying to see what's happening with the kids and maybe describe it? And there's people that have written books on this. And I think that it's good that they have. But yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that turned into an interesting conversation.
We'll be well on our way to getting canceled on episode 1.
All right. I don't know. I mean, I think we're starting from canceled.
Yeah, I think we are.
Yeah.
I think, that's the point.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore. Lay down the weapons that you use against the world. We don't need another war. Put down the weapons that you use against yourself.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew, Ryan,
Carol,
Keith,
Ashley, and I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did.
Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Infants on throne.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. Free fall, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking past the fight, laying down on Sunday night. Choosing love when I pick up this mic.